Should you choose the East Coast or the West Coast for college? I will definitely share all the pros and cons of choosing schools in each coast. I personally grew up in LA. I came from the West Coast and I went to school in the East Coast at Princeton. And I will definitely give you my top tips and advice on whether you should choose the West Coast or the East Coast. In the West Coast, you have prestigious schools like Stanford, Caltech, UC Berkeley, and UCLA, UC San Diego, and the rest of the UCs. You also have Pomona College, Claremont McKenna, Scripps, Pitzer, and other schools like Pepperdine and Loyola Marymount. So these are all the top schools that occupy the West Coast. And I have to say, the West Coast is quite lovely. I grew up in the West Coast. You get amazing sunshine all year round. The social life is much better for sure. You're right by the beach in California, and especially your peer group will be much more sociable. You'll have a better social life. You'll have better opportunities to engage in sports like basketball, soccer, tennis, especially when it's not snowing. And overall, the restaurants in the West Coast, I feel, are better. And because of this, it definitely creates a more social atmosphere when you can actually engage with your community in bright, sunny California. Obviously, I'm referring to California here. There's a lot of other schools that are in the West Coast that are not in California. This gives the most context given that I grew up in California. Now, my journey in the East Coast, I have to say, was quite challenging coming from California. Now, obviously, I had to go to Princeton. It was a top school that I got into. It was ranked #1 on the US News World Report. And so I was going to go to the best school, even if it meant going to the East Coast. With that being said, though, it was challenging. Half the year, or at least a quarter of the year to half the year, was snowing. It was freezing cold. I had to hike to my classrooms in boots, and I would get snow in my feet, and it made studying even more difficult, especially how difficult a place Princeton was. The food was also not especially good, I have to say. Coming from California and having to move to New Jersey, if you wanted to get good Asian food or good American food, it's quite difficult to find. I would say it's definitely a few notches below California. I don't know if it was because of the ingredients or it was just the chefs. The restaurants in New Jersey were definitely a few notches below California. Another thing is people there, you don't really get a whole lot of opportunity to play sports as much. And I say as much because obviously there is the indoor gym. I feel that playing basketball, which is my main sport, saved me from my journey at Princeton, from having a rough journey, as well as the eating clubs at Princeton where you get to socialize with your peers. But I will say people in the East Coast are not quite as much into sports as the West Coast. And because of that, I would say the West Coast has better basketball players compared to the students that I played against in the East Coast. But obviously, I didn't mind. I was there for the education. I wasn't trying to become a basketball player by any means, but playing basketball in the gym, especially when it's freezing cold, was really helped make my academic studies easier at Princeton. I will say though that the students are quite talented in the East Coast. East Coast students are usually wanting to work in New York on Wall Street in consulting and investment banking, whereas the students in the West Coast generally navigate toward tech. Because you're closer to Silicon Valley, you work at Google and Facebook. And I will say, I think a career in tech is a little bit more rewarding, especially in this digital age where you have big billion-dollar companies coming out of Silicon Valley, especially in the AI revolution, as well as blockchain technology and Internet of Things. I think there's a lot of really interesting technology coming out of Silicon Valley, and it's based in the West Coast. Whereas in the East Coast, you're really looking at investment banking, consulting, finance, looking to work on Wall Street, which is a completely different job. If I had to choose, I would definitely choose tech because it's just much more interesting. You get to apply your technical background, whereas investment banking, it's technical, but at the end of the day, you're just crunching numbers in a spreadsheet. So it's really not going to get much more difficult than addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, unless if you're doing some more interesting things like portfolio optimization or high frequency trading, then you'll use more computer science or linear algebra to solve different optimization problems. So without a doubt, if I had to do it all over again, I'd choose the West Coast. But after graduating, I definitely went back to the West Coast where I started my career. I did work for a year or two at Goldman Sachs, as well as doing high frequency trading in Chicago. But after that, I went straight back to the West Coast, where I've ever since then been helping students like yourself, high school students, navigate the competitive college admissions process.